Hey friends, we had the great pleasure of being interviewed by one of my favorite podcasts recently. Randy Nee and Kyle Whitaker host a show called The Pastor and Philosopher Walk into a Bar. Both exceedingly intelligent men who have dabbled in Enneagram. TJ and I sat down to talk about the Enneagram, its merits, its lack, and our choice for drinks while podcasting with these two guys. Our conversation here is split in half. The first half is much more philosophical and talking about Enneagram as a theory, where it works, where it doesn't work. And the second half is more practical. And we talk through whether Randy is an 8 or a 1, and whether Kyle is a 5 or a 4. I greatly enjoyed our time with these men, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly, I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
So Jeff and TJ, thanks for joining us in this conversation. We're really excited to talk to you guys about the Enneagram. I think we've both been listening to your show, and you also sent over some very detailed notes in response to some of the stuff that I had to say about the Enneagram.
It's all Jeff.
Yeah. I didn't want to presuppose, which one of you that primarily came from. Both your names were on it, so whoever wrote it, I appreciate it. It was very helpful to get my head around some of what you guys think about the Enneagram and how to approach this conversation. So I'm excited about it. I do want to give a disclaimer at the beginning. You may find at some point in this interview or conversation that I might seem like I have strong opinions. But it's simply because of context, because in reality, like on the list of things I care deeply about and get worked up about, the Enneagram is very
here we
low.
go. Here we go.
But I do have some opinions, and so we'll see how strongly those come out. So I just want you and the listener to know, if I seem like I know, I actually don't.
There's like a sentence that kind of encapsulates what you just did right here. It's like being very condescending and arrogant at the same time in a perfect
that.
yeah.
Yes.
Well
Probably
done.
because I'm a 5, I guess. I don't know. And the other disclaimer is that you guys sent us amazingly delicious whiskey.
Incredible.
Very generously, and so I'm inclined to agree with whatever you say. And so it could go either way, really.
With condescending and arrogance with a lot of integrity is what it sounds like.
and just appreciativeness, gratefulness for this delicious whiskey. So
Awesome.
And really, you're discovering the actual reason we sent the whiskey.
it could be. If so, well played.
What do you, TJ, I see you drinking something. What are you drinking?
I am drinking a local whiskey. I like local stuff. And this I got today because I'm in Illinois, and it is Whiskey Acres. It is a straight rye. This company apparently, they're farmers, and so they grow their own stuff, and they do all of the distilling and everything on the farm.
Cool.
And he was saying that they only do 350 barrels a year.
Wow.
Ever.
That's
so
incredible.
Yeah, it's small batch kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
it's really
Fun.
good.
Are both of you whiskey drinkers?
I like all the things. But TJ appears to be mostly whiskey, yeah. Whiskeys and scotches.
Yeah, I lean more towards whiskey.
Okay. What's some of your favorites?
Oban Scotch is the Scotch that this is the one that I have all the time. I love Oban. I don't know. I get around.
Yeah.
I like a lot of different
We had
stuff.
the Distiller's Edition on the show at one point. It was one of the ones we featured. Lovely scotch.
Oh,
Really good.
yeah. It's an excellent glass of whiskey.
Jeff, you drinking anything?
I'm presently sipping on the oatmeal stout from Founders Brewery. I was gonna try and get up for a whiskey, and I just didn't. I had a very active day and needed a little hydration. Yeah. But I'm normally a gin drinker. I really do enjoy scotches and whiskeys, and but I'm more of a gin connoisseur.
Yeah, you must have good taste based on what you sent us. And for our listeners will have already heard our tasting at this point. But for yours who don't know, this is called Signet. It's from Glenmorangie in Scotland, and it is one of my favorite whiskeys, period, not just Scotch. It's wonderful.
So good. Well, Kyle, should we jump in?
Yeah, let's do it. So in this group here, the four of us, I feel a little outnumbered. We have two people who run a podcast about the Enneagram, obviously very pro. Randy is pretty pro, although I saw in the outline you put some fair, possibly critical questions. I appreciated that. I'm the skeptic. I'm the holdout, but also, as I said, a relatively apathetic skeptic. Not very high on my priority list, but I don't buy it. So interested to see how this goes. What made you guys want to, because you approached us, what made you want to talk to us about this?
I've been a huge fan of your podcast.
Nice.
I have worked professionally as both a pastor and a philosopher for over 12 years and found your podcast, I believe it was like a year ago. And just a lot of the people that you're conversing with, a lot of the topics that you're covering ended up being things that I've been very interested in for a while. And so it was, but I've kind of gotten out of the literature. And so your podcast has kind of kept me up to date for the most part, especially when you have specialists on who are talking about contemporary work.
Yeah.
So,
And you probably overheard Kyle condescendingly talk about the Enneagram, I'm sure.
Only once. I think it came up one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it popped once, and I got the bug. I got my hair on my arms went up, and I was like, I need to connect with these men. And over a slow 7 or 8 month drip have sought to make this happen.
And here we are. Yeah.
Here we are. Yeah. What was your philosophical background like? I was going to ask that later, but I think now is as good a time as any. It might help me to frame kind of where you're coming from.
Got my master's degree from CU Boulder. Studied under Wes Morrison and Michael Tooley.
Oh, no way.
My focus was on the problem of divine hiddenness is what I wrote on, but most of the stuff I really got into Pascal at that time, and that's been a real focus of mine, has been Pascal since then.
Yeah. Okay, that's quite different. So that's a lot of somewhat disparate influences for listeners who don't know. The people he named are very analytic, particularly Tooley, who's kind of well known for being a very analytic atheist, mounted probably one of the strongest versions of the problem of evil that's ever been written. And then Pascal, something else. Something very different.
So we do a podcast, Jeff, that we talk about all sorts of different topics. And some of them we come back around to, whether it's the Bible or creation and evolution. There's a number of things that we kind of go back to several times, but I can't imagine as a podcaster talking about one thing for, I think as I've been listening through your podcast, you've got over 140 episodes live, I think. Tell us about what made you want to do an Enneagram podcast and just keep doing it.
And you have more than one. There's like 2, right?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now there's 3.
We got 3 feeds now.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So we are both nerds. There's first start. So when we get into something, we usually get into it pretty hard. As we were studying and learning more and more about the Enneagram for our own purposes, we realized that there's not like the type of podcast or engagement with the material that's out there. It didn't satiate us. Like there wasn't the kind of podcast that we really wanted. There was a lot of surface level, a lot of business oriented, and a lot of sort of intro podcasts. And there also is a lot of information out there that's more focusing on one person, like they have a guest and they talk about that one person and some of the issues that go around with them. And so we sat down and we talked about what if we did our own podcast that would essentially go around the circle, that would talk about issues instead of people, and we could address all 9 types through that lens. And that kind of just happened, and here we are 4 years later, and we just haven't run out of material to talk about yet.
And what number are you guys? I
am a type 9, sometimes called the peacemaker or the mediator. Basically, I want things to be calm and simple and harmonious, and I avoid conflict at all costs.
And what's your wing, 8 or 1?
So we actually don't necessarily believe that wings are typically dominant. We think that you can use the tools from your wings in different ways and different spaces. And
you're going to have to explain to me what that means when you're done talking.
So I personally don't. I go back and forth. I use my 8 wing for certain scenarios. Okay. I use my 1 wing for certain scenarios. I don't think I lean more in either direction.
It's a good description of kind of what our topics are. It's much more Enneagram theory and talking theory all over the place. But I-type is a 1, and 1s are improvers. Really want to, they connect to the world by trying to make it better. And that happens in relationships and in jobs and physical spaces. And that's how I type.
So I guess I'll say I'm a 5, supposedly.
That works.
And I'm literally having to look up what my wings or whatever were, because I don't remember. It's been a long time.
Well, these guys don't care about wings, so
probably not. But I want you to explain 8 and 4, and I don't remember which one was which. Explain what you just said, TJ, about wings. And
so if you look at the Enneagram diagram, it's a circle with a bunch of lines in the middle, and wings describe the type on either side of you. So there are some tests and information out there that give what I would call what you just described a tri-type.
Okay.
So you are dominant in 5, and then you have some strong 8 qualities, and you also have some strong 4 qualities. But the fact that 8 is far away from you means that it cannot be your wing.
Okay.
So 4 and 6 are the only wings for 5, and you draw from different qualities on either side of that to sort of fill out some of the spaces.
Great.
All right. So I've been told that, well, I'm definitely an 8 with a 7 wing, but then I've been told I go to a 2 in health and a 5 in unhealth. Can you describe for us what that means? Or do you believe in those words?
So, yeah, we do not use those words.
Okay.
We use stress and security most often. And so what that means is that describes the lines that are in the middle of the circle. And stress and security, when we are in stress places, when our normal methods for getting the things that we want aren't working, we move to a stress place, and we start to grab some of the qualities that are there. Our motivation stays the same in our center, but now we're picking up some of the behavior that's down there. And we are very strong believers that you can do that in healthy and unhealthy ways, which is why we don't like health and unhealth as descriptors. So as an 8, when you are in stress, moving to 5 means that you can pick up some of the great things that are there at 5 to help you recenter, figure out what's going on, and then move back to 8 to figure out how to re-engage. Or you can go to 5 and just basically take your ball and go home. You can do the unhealthy version of things that are at 5. And same thing for security in the other direction.
Got it.
Okay, so at this point, a lot of your listeners are like vibing, yeah, this is awesome, and a lot of our listeners are like, what the hell are they talking about? So let's back up. And, what is the Enneagram? And why should people who have no familiarity with it care?
Enneagram's a theory about human motive. A lot of people will paint it as a personality typing system, which it can be. I like it better as a theory about human motivation, and giving language to what motivates us can be incredibly helpful. And it just so happens that when jumping into that topic and talking about your motive, my motive, and when lots of different people talk about their motivations, what Enneagram suggests is that patterns begin to emerge in which some people are providing very similar answers. And lo and behold, as you begin to push and see their life experiences, you begin to see things like what we're talking about. In stress, this is what those with my motivation tend to do. When I feel secure, this is more how I move. And lo and behold, we see this pattern nearly across the board. It's one of those things that's very hard to test for, or it's not a physical thing like the sciences often can chart. But if the theory holds, it would be something like, when talking about human motivation, 9 big types emerge, and they tend to have very similar struggles and similar patterns of behavior and similar ways that they attach in relationships, similar ways that they solve problems, and the rest.
Mm-hmm. So how did those types, how are they arrived at? You use the word emerge. That's not necessarily the word I might have used, but you know way more about the Enneagram than me, so I'm happy to defer to you on its history and development. So yeah, why 9? Why the specific 9? Where does that come from? Why are you committed to that being a hard limit? Is it flexible, etc.?
In our mind, I'll speak for TJ, I suppose, the 9 types are discovered, they're not invented. And so it's more like pulling back the veil on human motive and engaging human psychology from that specific line of thought and discovery, and finding that the best way to articulate what's going on across the spectrum of human beings is something like describing everyone's motive with 9 different words or ideas, and that pattern ends up being a very helpful way of talking about one's inner life. It would be like talking about 7 colors, or better yet, talking about 12 musical notes. That the 12 musical notes are, in essence, discovered. And what we see with the 12 musical notes is that they actually go around in a circle, and that there are different combinations, there's overtones, there's ways that they can pair and create harmonies. And that's real similar in our mind to how human motive works.
So I'm happy with the metaphor. I was going to ask you about that metaphor anyway with music. I think that's helpful. But of course, there are ways that we know that there are those discrete types in music, that there is only a limited number of notes and a limited number of possible combinations of those notes. They're like verifiable methods that we can use to discern that. And so is anything, it seems like that's where the metaphor breaks down. And so is there anything similar in the case of the Enneagram? Because the other part of my question was, are you committed to there just being 9? And if so, what justifies that?
How would you know that there's 12 notes?
The music people tell me. the people who study the physics of sound tell me that there's only so many things that, the human ear can perceive.
I think it would be actually real similar in terms of what is being named is that there's like a combination when you have a frequency. In music, there's a certain frequency and it pairs and matches with a different frequency over and over and over and over and over again. And I would say that it's real similar in terms of how our motivations work. When people begin to describe how and why they're motivated, the language, if say you interviewed 20 people who typed, just for, say you assumed the theory, you had 20 people that typed as a type 8, and then you looked at their language and how they talked about engaging the world, what you would see is a lot of really common patterns. And then if you talked about 5s, what you would actually see is another pattern in terms of the connection between type 8 and the type 5 that have some similarities and distinctions. Because 5s, when secure, actually take on a lot of the characteristics of 8s. And 8s, when in stress, take on a lot of the characteristics of 5. So your relationship, which shares a line, ends up having a natural chemistry to it. And that's worth talking about, and it's something that's unveiled, discovered after countless conversations.
I have objections, but they're not potentially like go to the core of it kind of objections. But I do want to insist that you answer the question specifically. Are you committed to there only being 9?
Yeah, I think that's what's discovered. What do you say, Teach?
You think that has been discovered?
Yeah, that's my take, but
I am as committed to there only being 9 as I am to there only being 7 colors in the rainbow. Okay,
now see, that to me is an extraordinarily strong claim that would require an extraordinary amount of evidence on the level that physics gives us about color. And like, it's, hopefully you agree, absolutely non-controversial that nothing exists in that way for the Enneagram or for any personality inventory. So it just seems to me that the claim that you guys have committed yourself to far outstrips the evidence. Now, I'm fine with saying this is like extraordinarily useful in a lot of identifiable ways, and we can describe those ways in our own experiences and the experiences of people that we've met and talked to about this. And we've have 150 episodes describing of our podcast describe. Totally fine with that. But that's an extraordinary claim that you just made. Compare it, for example, to what the Big Five, which is like the most scientifically validated personality inventory. The claim it makes for itself is something along the lines of these 5 types capture about 80% of personality variance among humans. And so there's about 20% that it doesn't capture. And also those 5 types are about primarily human behavior, or language used to describe human behavior. And it really is kind of, as you described, a discovered thing in the sense of the types were developed based on the ways people describe themselves, and then kind of making abstractions from lots of those ways in scientifically rigorous ways. Alternatively, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems like for the Enneagram, the types pre-existed the evidence or the application. So we have the system, and then we kind of apply it to people's experiences. And what do you know? We find a lot of commonality, and that it seems to make a lot of sense. But it's more of a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up approach. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, but that's how it seems to me.
To circle back to musical theory, the idea that there is an H or an I note doesn't really make sense in music theory because it's a circle. And as Enneagram gets unfolded in terms of theory, it's circular in nature. And so it's almost an all or nothing kind of package. So I do understand the big five could say, hey, there's a big six. Mm-hmm. That's all fine for me. I'm not an advocate for that. But in terms of Enneagram, it functions much more as a holistic system. Mm-hmm. Now, that actually makes it easy to disprove on one front if you can figure out a 10.
Yeah, it does. So let's get to that. So this is another concern I have with this kind of rigidity about the numbers, the amount of them, the nature of them, is that it doesn't seem like I'm free to not fit into them, right? So if I have the experience, which I did have, maybe I took the wrong test. I don't know. I took the WEPS. And so maybe you think that one's awful. I don't know. But you know, it puts me in some boxes, right? And I know you don't think that's the purpose of the Enneagram, and I want to hear you out about that. But if I feel like, I don't know if I strongly identify with what it told me. I do in some ways, but not in other ways. Maybe I just as strongly identify with some of the other numbers. Maybe I strongly identify with things that aren't on that list at all. Maybe yep. I think I'm just more complex than that. It doesn't seem like I'm free to take that move. It seems like I've somehow misunderstood myself if I can't locate myself in its categories. Do you think that's right or no?
You got thoughts, Steve?
I do. I would say if you are wearing a pair of glasses and they don't help you see better, then you should probably get new glasses. And in the same way, if you are attempting to use the Enneagram for better self-knowledge and even self-improvement, and you are trying to use tools from a type that don't work for you, then you should probably try another type.
Where the rubber really hits the road, I think, is when I don't find that any of them completely capture me, or that there's some other thing that's just not on the list that I think is a core aspect of my personality. Am I free to say this list is incomplete? It sounds like you're claiming that I am not. And if I'm not, I want to know why.
I would love to say two things on that front. One, I think it's right to distinguish between how you see the world as a type and then theory as a set of glasses. Theories are a set of glasses. You view reality through presuppositions that make sense of what you are encountering. If it's the case that there are anomalies, they need to be named and dealt with, or else they disprove the theory. And so your experience can be a disproof of the theory. And I think that's what I would be committed to in terms of saying, is there a 10th type? I think I'd be more committed to saying, I think that there are legitimate anomalies out there that would negate the theory.
Excellent. Okay, good. That's helpful. Thank you.
And I would also say that while we can, there are lots of things to say about why you might present as a different type than you actually are. Things like trauma breaks all the rules. But realistically, if you and I were friends and I was trying to convince you that the Enneagram was real and you were bringing up these exact issues, I would say, that's fine. You don't need it. Mm-hmm. It's not for you. That's fine.
We're all agreed that I don't need it. what I want to get to the bottom of is whether or not it's valid. But I'm going to let Randy ask some questions. I've been hogging this.
Well, I mean, I'm just wondering if part of your discomfort, Kyle, is not simply with the Enneagram itself, but with the strong way it's kind of presented and sold by some. That this is ironclad. We know it to be true. Is that your discomfort with it? If they were just claiming that this is a great tool to understand yourself and understand others, and it's one of many, but it's our favorite, would you have as many issues?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I would have issues, but not as many. So I would have a different set of issues. So I wrote a little thing that you guys read, and maybe I'll put in the show notes for this one. And if you want, I can go through my main objections in a bit. But yeah, that is one of them. Because I know people, I think you're one of these people who uses it in very responsible ways. And it is kind of a tool for self-discovery, but there's not a lot of weight put on its pronouncements. It's just helpful when it's helpful, and if it's not helpful, it's not helpful. And I have other friends who use it kind of like a parlor game, something akin to astrology or the Myers-Briggs. And I have no problem with that. I'm a Ravenclaw, right? that's the joke I like to make, and I put just as much weight on that as I do on the Enneagram. Frankly, I know that's maybe an offensive thing to say, but I think it's just as well.
Not at all.
Well, he's also really weird about Harry Potter. So.
I am. I'm a huge Harry Potter buff, and like those 4 houses, they're less complex, obviously, but they map onto major traits of human personality in very obvious ways. And it didn't take somebody brilliant; it just took J.K. Rowling to come up with them, And millions of people have found that they really identify with them and feel at home in them, and have developed communities around them and that are very life-giving and very introspective. And there's self-discovery that happens in conversations about
You're
the houses.
getting so geeky.
I know, but it's true. And so, like, I'm totally fine with all that.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with all
But even
that.
Dumbledore himself said that sometimes he thinks that we sort too soon.
I love that you know that. See, now I can't give any more objections. We're done. I'm gonna drink your whiskey and talk about Harry Potter.
A primary for me, and this was the one thing I really wanted to get Kyle's response to, is a primary for me is that the movement from modernity to postmodernity ends up being the move to subjectivity, the move from the stuff out there to how we interpret all the stuff out there. And psychology itself is a fairly new discipline on these fronts in terms of talking about the filter that is you. Because it used to be the case. It used to be the case that, no, this is the objective truth, as it were. And obviously, 20th century philosophy ends up being just replete with analysis of language, analysis of your filter.
Which is what gave rise to the Big Five, by the way, right? I mean, it's like ordinary language philosophy, more or less. We look at dictionaries. And
so as opposed to some folks, and TJ kind of recounted some of the work on this front, who want to see Enneagram as a very ancient system. I tend to say Enneagram is red hot new and seeking to talk about how we engage reality given our motive, because our motive is everything. As I put in the notes that I sent you, I feel as though you cannot prove anything at the outset. You have to assume some things without evidence that make sense of everything else. So for example, you have to assume that the world out there exists. You cannot prove that. You have to assume that other people have a self-conscious experience the way that you do. That cannot be verified. And I could go through 20 other things. We could talk about Planck and properly basic ideas. We could talk about how presuppositions work. I'm a big fan of Thomas Kuhn. There ends up being something at the beginning of the knowledge process in which we are talking about presuppositions. And here's the kicker. They come out of your motive.
yeah, I don't buy that part. I was mostly okay with the rest of it. We could quibble about the modernity, post-modernity thing. I think what you're describing is thoroughly modern. But
Ooh,
I mean, it's Kant.
why is that?
It's the Copernican turn. I mean, it didn't
Why wouldn't it be categorized as a postmodern way of conceiving?
Postmodernism is largely a rejection to what Kant was doing in making kind of a knowledge-first philosophy, as I understand it. So there would be no postmodernism if modern philosophy hadn't already made that move, if that makes sense. So it's not like the world is out there to be known and we just got to get close enough to it with our methods. That's demolished in Kant long before there were any such thing as postmodernists. And I think he was right. Okay. So like to a large extent. And if I had a theory of motive, which I don't, because I don't know anything about psychology, it would be a kind of deontology, but that's more focused on an ethic than anything else, like a function of motive.
You're going to have to start translating here.
Yeah, sorry. It's his fault. He brought it up. But I totally agree with this basic point, which is kind of a pun, which is that, yeah, you got to start somewhere. And that place is not going to be justified by something else. And for me, I'm an empiricist. It's sense perceptions. Some version of sense perception. I'm a kind of post-Kantian empirist, so I think there is a priori knowledge. But like in general, I'm a physical thing, and I interact with other physical things. and that's where all knowledge is built out from.
Would it be fair to say that you're motivated to choose sense perception over something else?
Yeah, of course. And I hope that I'm motivated by reason and by evidence. That's my goal.
And you're a 5.
Of course. But that specific thing, right, that you just did, that you know what I'm going to say, you know what you were doing. Like it's that kind of thing that raises the hackles of people who don't feel themselves to fit well in the categories, because any kind of thing that I bring up, even if I think it cuts to the foundations of it, it's always easily explained away by the theory itself.
I would love to talk about hackles because I think that's incredibly important. I have natural aversions to a whole host of things. And naming why I have an aversion ends up mattering, I think. And I absolutely sympathize with that place that you're in. And I think, as TJ said, if this isn't helpful, chuck it to the side of the road.
Yeah.
I really do enjoy the Enneagram. I started out like I am for everything that's kind of seems like a fad. I was very skeptical, and everybody was trying to like put a number on Pastor Randy, and I just don't do well in response to those kind of situations. But my spiritual director practices it. I highly honor and respect and love my spiritual director, and think the world of him. And so he's well versed in it, and he's brought it to me in a way that's been a gift to me. It's really, really transformed the way I see myself, the way I engage with the world around me, the way I engage with my kids and my wife, all sorts of things. It's been helpful for me on our team of elders, or people who are helping lead our church. Knowing one another has diffused so much strife and wasted time on trying to figure out where you're coming from. It was a profound transformative tool for our elders to do an Enneagram workshop with an expert. That being said, I still do have my skepticism about it, and it's usually in the way that it's brought to me, in the way it's kind of, submitted to the world. And they're both kind of polar opposites, but I don't like it when I hear people talk about the Enneagram as the end-all be-all of knowing about the world and about ourselves and about one another, when it's kind of taken as kind of worshipped almost, I get really uncomfortable, which I think we probably all should. But for some reason, it seems that there's a propensity to go there with Enneagram. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. And then conversely, I also get uncomfortable with people who take a online free or, $10 assessment, do the thing, who knows what kind of situation they're in when they do the assessment. They want to get their number, and then they just talk about their number and why they're that number, and they know nothing about it. They haven't been guided through it by somebody who actually knows about the Enneagram and who can kind of coach them and train them and have a long-term relationship with it. Those two things drive me nuts, and I see a lot of that out there as a pastor. What are your guys' thoughts on those?
I'd love to speak to this. There is something about, and this was mentioned by Kyle earlier, and I think it's incredibly important, that with Enneagram, I'm talking about you, and I'm talking about your inner life, and I'm going to talk about where you struggle, and I'm going to talk about some things that are really personal, and I'm going to make assumptions about you, and I don't know you. Mm-hmm. But I have this system, and the system is all of a sudden grabbing hold of you. And so one of the things I wrote in my notes to y'all was, oftentimes the same critiques that I hear about Enneagram are the identical critiques I hear about Christianity. And they come across as, don't control me, 1, and 2, you don't have the evidence, 2, and 3, you don't know me. Mm-hmm. By the way, that's a great threefold Enneagram way of opposing any system.
Also a great album trilogy for a punk band.
There is something about this where if I was just talking about my theory of giraffes, nobody would care. You say, yeah, your theory about giraffes is probably really important and it's doing good in the world. But when I say this is my theory about human motivation, that is going to cut deep because motive is deep. I think that motive is almost bedrock in terms of your human identity that lasts over time and is likely eternal. And so, of course, we're pushing into the most core things about what makes you, in my mind.
So I haven't encountered the Enneagram in a way that talks about it's centered on human motivation. As I think it through the ways that I've, experienced the Enneagram with my spiritual director, I think it makes sense. But tell me why that human motivation thing is so big for you. I'm assuming you're not the only ones who think that the Enneagram is all about human motivation, but where does that come from, that angle on it?
Is that us, TJ?
It might be us.
Is that original?
We're repackaging similar ideas from other people. So Richard Rohr talks a lot about the avoidances. I avoid conflict. 8s avoid being controlled. The avoidances are part of how this person teaches it, and when you think about that in different ways, you can actually see that being a motivation. And I think that Jeff and I just really stumbled into using the word motivation and leaned into that in a way that, like, this has become how we talk about the Enneagram, is that it's about human motive.
5s avoid being incompetent, and 8s avoid being vulnerable. Given my discipline, this is a worthwhile overlap of things that just hadn't overlapped.
So 2 things. I mean, one, you just said something about an 8 that I completely don't identify with. You said that 8s avoid vulnerability, and I actually have to be vulnerable.
Randy, I would really like to talk to you about your type.
Yeah?
I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, brother.
Tell me. All right, here, let's go.
And they type people that they've never met. I just heard you typing all the actors in Jurassic Park, so this is apparently a thing they're okay with.
No, they're fictional characters. It's fine.
So, is that real, Jeff?
I would want to have a longer conversation with you about 8ness. There's a lot of things that you say and that don't strike me as coming out of that motive, but I don't want to have an existential crisis here on the podcast either. But it is one of those places where, how do we talk through? Unfortunately, you can't put people under a microscope in terms of their motive. This is one of the great glories of being a human being, is that you have I believe you have an immaterial essence to yourself, which is profound and depthy, and you cannot be reduced to electrochemical activity in your skull. That would be my metaphysic. I don't know if you guys hold that. I don't know that
we've been meaning to have an episode on that for a long time, and we've just never gotten around to it. Maybe this will prompt it.
Yeah, let's not have it right now, though. So I really want to talk to you, Jeff, more about what you think I am, or what you hear that's not 80 of me, but not 8.
Yeah.
Oh man, I lost my train of thought. I had one more question.
Existential crisis. I was sorry.
I think
it's just old man.
Yeah, it's just being
here.
in his 40s.
Well,
yeah. So one of the things I try to point out in that essay, and I really don't want to belabor this point, is that it's simply not scientific, but it should be, because what it's doing is a very scientific thing. And all of the attempts at making it scientific have either arrived at a kind of neutral conclusion or just been negative results. And there just haven't been that many people willing to take it up. And so if you're right, maybe more people will, and it'll become a whole thing. And I'd be fine to see that and be corrected. But my perspective as a very much non-scientist is that that's very unlikely.
So this was, I sent you my debate with the fine folks. I forgot that.
I'm sorry to admit that I did not have time to watch that, but maybe I will get to.
Our entire debate was about how the work hasn't been done. The people who were doing the work died. If the work hasn't been done, I'm a philosopher. I'm not a scientist. That's not my job. My job is to talk about systems. As a system, I can defend my end of the bargain. And as I wanted to say earlier, the Wild Wild West is upon us on this front. And if it is the case that those with some fire in their belly get into this as PhD students want to do some dissertation work on Enneagram, you're going to see a whole host of really interesting things happen. I cannot do anything about that except for throw $20 their way and wish them well.
Right.
And I'm curious to hear what they hear on that end. But you have Stanford psychotherapists who love the hell out of this material. And that's enough for me on one front. Secondarily, and I think this is really much more important in terms of this discussion, I put this in the notes I sent you, the places where there is psychological study happening oftentimes creates theories that is using language that Enneagram has been using. And so what you actually have is complementary theories moving. And what Enneagram, in my experience, ends up being is just, it's a much more simplistic language. And simplism isn't always bad. E equals MC squared is brilliant because of its simplicity. Enneagram does a great job of bringing in a handful of psychological theories that end up having tons of literature behind them. So I would footnote and say you should look up object relation theory. I would footnote and say you should look up self-determination theory. Both of these divide human beings into three camps, just like the Enneagram does, and they do it in different patterns. What Enneagram does that's really interesting is it takes those patterns of threes and it creates it into a more holistic system. And that is we're talking about. I realize it would take quite a bit to actually pitch that as a theory, but lo and behold, that's why the Enneagram actually has some real bass tones to it.
All right. We're not going to come to terms on this point in this conversation. So let's slightly change the subject because there's other important questions that I want to get to. So what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions or illegitimate critiques that you've encountered about the Enneagram? Feel free to include mine if you want. What's like the thing you wish its critics understood about it?
The first one for me is that it is not a product of the occult.
Yeah.
This is a scare tactic used by the same people who thought D&D was going to turn everyone into Satanists. Like, it is just the end of it.
I grew up being taught that, yeah.
And the people who really wanted to turn people away from anything new age in the 80s and 90s really did a lot of work to convince everyone that the Enneagram was evil. That's my biggest, like, just stop. Yeah. This is silly.
I mean, not to double down on what we just said, but it's dismissed by pretentious, uninformed academics, and they should have just said, "Look, I've never studied this."
Who might you be referring
I've
to?
never heard Kyle referred to as such, but I like it.
You're not doing that. It's the fucking psychologists that are doing that. I'll cut that. It's the psychologists that are doing that. I'm not the one who needs to tell people, "Hey, you know what? I've never done any study on that, and I probably shouldn't comment." But that's what they do. And you know how I know that? Is because I've heard these folks tell me what the Enneagram is, and they are uninformed.
Yeah, fair. Okay, so follow up then. What is one or two legitimate critiques that you think exist of the Enneagram?
The tests are unreliable because it's all about self-reporting.
Okay, I was going to ask you about this anyway, so explain what you mean by that. Because, like, Randy and I used the same tests. We got results that seemed to fit us, frankly, right? Honestly, if I'd taken anything and gotten anything other than a 5, I would have thought something was wrong with it. But
the truth is coming out here. All right.
Right,
good.
but this is like, a test written by a psychologist, one of the few, like, trained psychologists who have developed their own tests. But I've read, I've read lots of Enneagram proponents who say this is a really bad way to, like, type yourself is taking these tests. And they're like, it's not a good way to know your number. So, yeah, explain why.
Especially as someone who wears glasses and has to go to an optometrist, there is a level of subjectivity involved in how we see. And so we have to spend time with a set of glasses to understand it more clearly and to know if it actually works. So when you take the test, you are taking the test in a moment, in a situation. And to have some type of algorithm determine for you how you see the world may change from day to day or from moment to moment. So the idea that taking this one test will forever determine where to put me into this box to me it is all of the things about reductionism that people level at the Enneagram. And I get that. I am fully on board with that.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that.
Jeff, what was your answer to the legitimate critique question?
As a theory, Enneagram, it seems to me, is a substantive description of human behavior that has not been disproven. And theories need to be disproven. And I would reference Thomas Kuhn on this front, that the way that theories work is you assume a way of seeing the world. The way that you disprove theories is to showcase anomalies, and that's how theories are put down. And I would suggest the work has not been done to disprove the Enneagram. That's the problem. What has been done is ridicule. What has been done is assumption. What has been done are postures towards people who are clearly lunatics who have a symbol that looks like a pentagram having sex with a triangle. We get it. We get it.
I think we have our soundbite for this episode.
Yeah.
The academic work hasn't been put in to disprove the theory.
Yeah, I love how you turned the legitimate critique into a strength.
That was very good. That was very good, Jeff. I'm intrigued by what you said where you doubt whether I'm a Enneagram 8, perhaps.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you tease that out a little bit from what you've heard. And just, do you mind?
I would too. Let's psychoanalyze Randy.
Yeah.
This isn't psychoanalysis. I'm sorry. Do your thing on him.
Randy, would you describe yourself as, would other people describe you as being too much?
Sometimes.
Is it the case that when you're in stress, you retreat into your head?
Like legit stress, not like there's too much traffic stress, but like your world might be falling apart a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's kind of between my head and I get pretty combustive.
Describe combustive.
I see what needs to be done, or I see the problem, and I get angry if things aren't happening to help come to a healthy place. Does that make sense?
Are you a my way guy or the right way guy?
Jeez.
What's the difference?
Okay, sorry. I would say I'm the right way guy.
Is it the case that you connect to others by telling them how they can do better in their lives?
Sure.
Is it the case that you have a strong radar when things are not ordered well?
Ordered well? I don't know. I thought you were going to say something about like justice or not right, and then I would say yes. Ordered well, maybe.
Okay. TJ.
Justice counts because justice is a sense of order. There is a way that things in the world should be.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe there is a way in the world that things should be?
I think so. Yeah.
These are all answers that a different type would give.
I don't know the punchline. Tell me the
But
punchline.
there's a reason that you're drawn. Tell me your story about being drawn to being a pastor.
Say that again, Jeff.
Pastoring is work that,
Mm-hmm.
in theory, doesn't have a lot of financial reward.
Mm-hmm.
But you're drawn to it, and you've committed your life to it,
Mm-hmm.
and you serve people at a high level. Why have you jumped into that vocation?
It's a loaded question, but I mean, feeling called into it makes a huge is a huge part of it. But I think I'm committed to the church and the way of Jesus because I think it's the best way to live out as a human being, and to treat others, to see the world, orient yourself towards the world. Does that make sense?
It does. I want to talk about myself at some point, TJ, but you got other things?
No, because we're already there, I think.
Where is there? Tell me the punchline.
The there ends up being like this. You and I are angry, but your anger doesn't necessarily unleash at the world first. Your anger unleashes at yourself first, correct?
I don't know if I'm prepared to answer that yet. I need to think about that is what I mean.
Let me talk about myself. A primary motive for me is to improve the world. I connect by wanting to help people to be better. I have a radar in discussion for trying to advance the conversation and to elevate the conversation. I'm very idealistic. When it's the case that problems happen relationally, I generally have a blind spot to that. But I often end up blaming myself first if things go badly. In fact, self-criticism is a strong part of my personality. It's also one of the reasons I got into church work. It's because here's a place that I idealistically think that the world can be improved. There's a vision of reality here that I can get behind. There is a power here that I think is real, tangible, that I connect to, and I feel that power not in my emotions, my relational self. I feel it in my intuitions. The volume level, the corporate singing, often do something to me that elevates, and that's a place I connect with God. My Enneagram oneness comes out in ways that look like that, and I could talk for days about this. I don't see your anger being unleashed on knuckleheads. I don't see your lust, a voracious appetite. And as you said earlier, you don't feel vulnerable. And those are primary for 8s.
Well, for me, vulnerability is really important, actually.
Okay.
Like it's, if I feel like I can't be vulnerable, I almost I just make my way through that conversation or that relationship out of duty rather than enjoyment. Like as a pastor, I felt like I was dying when I couldn't tell my congregation what I believed because I was scared of what they might think or if they might go away. And, you know, now that I've, in the last several years, kind of come clean about everything that I believe, I feel a profound sense of peace and comfort and satisfaction, if that makes sense.
Can you talk about the fear of your congregation going away because of what you were talking about?
It's just, I feel like a typical pastoral fear is that if people know what I really think, they might, you know, think that I'm a heretic or, you know, I'll lose my job, basically. Losing my church means I lose my job. That's not a good motivation. I really, really hate that as a motivation. So I've pushed against that. And I've said, to me, what's more important is being authentic rather than being liked or rather than being popular. I'd rather be myself. I'd rather be honest. That's a huge motivator for me, is honesty.
TJ?
Why? What's important about honesty?
Because it's myself. If I can't be honest, I'm not being myself. And that seems like I'm not interested in not being myself.
So an 8 would typically answer a question like that. An 8 is concerned about honesty because the truth is better than any kind of untruth. Not necessarily about being true to you, because a lot of 8s don't have a sense of true to me. There is truth and there is not truth. And the truth is always preferable to the not truth, because then we're not wasting time on the not truth. There's almost a dismissiveness about the idea of being false in any way. And it's less about any kind of sense of integrity or goodness or even feeling good about being myself. It's about there is truth and there is not truth, and I don't want to waste my time on not truth.
Also, other people's opinions don't matter at all. As an 8,
I can go there a little bit. I conflicted a lot with the Enneagram 9 on our elder team because he was always worried about what people are going to think, and I always said, "Who cares? We're leading this church, and we think that this is the right thing to do, and so that's all that matters." I can go there too, though.
So what number do you guys think Randy is?
To wrap all this up, Kyle says.
Well, actually, Jeff thinks he is a 1 rather than an 8. And 1s and 8s can look very similar sometimes, especially because of the way their energy comes at the world. I am less convinced about 1. I would lean toward 4. I would say look into 4, read a lot about 4s, and see what's there. And if any of it feels like home, then read more about 4s.
TJ is also much better at typing, working with folks with typing than I am.
Can you describe for me again a 1?
1s are going to take in the world through their intuitions. Just be very aware of their spaces. Not so much aware of their relationships. Very aware of their spaces and how they feel. 1s are going to be angry at themselves commonly as kind of their default when things are broken. Ones are going to solve problems with their head. They want to, and they primarily want to focus on what's right. Some people focus on what the goal is or what the data is for 5s. But ones focus on rightness is a different category. If I know what's right, then I'll know how to be in the world. And I will be good, and I will earn what I desire. That would be how ones often come to the world.
Let me give you this. I could do this all night. Obviously, we're talking about me. This is great.
Yeah.
Just one example. I was talking with a friend who is an Enneagram 1, and he is, you can see it on him, like he feels like an Enneagram 1. And I was describing for him an experience I had with a Muslim at a Muslim vigil for the Christchurch victims. This was several years ago. 50-some people got murdered in New Zealand while praying. Sure. And I went to the vigil, spoke there, and had this transcendent moment where a young imam who I know, a little bit, we embraced. It was beautiful. I felt so received in that moment, and it was a transformative experience in that I felt like it was I forget what I've called it, but like Jesus saying, I have sheep who are not of my fold. And I felt like that. I felt like this is a Jesus moment, even though I'm with a bunch of Muslims right now. I told that to my friend who's an Enneagram 1, who's also a pastor, and he short-circuited because for him, and I don't know if this is an Enneagram 1-ness, but in processing the conversation, this is what I've been told. For him, he couldn't go there because Islam and Christianity are different, and there's rules about that. And it's like you could see he broke when I was talking about that. Is that, and I've attributed that as he's an Enneagram 1. He's things have to be in their order, and there's a sensible way about this. For me, it felt I was basing everything about my experience in the authoritative moment that it was or wasn't on what I felt, and I felt something deep and profound, and I'm going to go on that rather than what I think is the right order that I've been prescribed before. Does that make sense?
It does. Being very black and white in the way that you're describing your friend is one posture to the world. Being very black and white about open-mindedness is actually the same. So when I come to the world, I'm a fairly progressive person. I've transitioned fairly hard on this front, and I'm pretty aggressive now about prescribing a way of being open-minded.
Yeah.
And that is the right way to think.
I identify with that in major ways, yeah.
It's because it's true.
That's fun. Thank you for doing this.
It's fun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys are obviously experts at this. This is what I wanted to say. We can use this to wrap it up if we want, but I really firmly believe, as much as as little as I've engaged with the Enneagram, that it should not be done on your own. And I'm sure you guys would affirm that.
Agreed.
So for someone who can't afford or can't find a spiritual director, or for someone who, doesn't have a guru, would you say a good way to go about the Enneagram would be literally start at your podcast at episode 1 and just roll through it and kind of journey with you through that?
We created a podcast called Start Here, which has, I believe, 21 episodes. That is the best place to go in our mind in terms if you want to jump into the material and swim in these waters. Secondarily, if we end up, because our circle is kind of small, we end up meeting together monthly on Zoom with about 20 people, and we end up talking shop. That might be another place to converse with people if you want to get into the material. If you wanted to get into theory and you really feel comfortable, then our primary podcast, which has a few thousand listeners, is called Around the Circle. Kyle and Randy, can you describe your podcast?
Yeah, so our show is a Pastor and Philosopher Walk into a Bar. We only have one podcast. It's plenty.
Underachieving.
It's all we can do. It's basically what it sounds like. Both of our wives named it independently. And we thought, yeah, that's the name we should go with. We both like bar spaces, both because of nice alcohol, but also because of the kind of honesty that happens in that kind of space and the lack of judgmentalism and the free discussion. And so that's kind of what we try to do on the show, straddling what it means to think of the world from a pastoral or more theological or spiritual lens, and what it means to think of it philosophically, because there's a huge amount of overlap. And so we also try to have on a lot of guests. So that's the difference between our shows, is we're probably 70-30-ish guests to just us riffing about stuff. So we have a lot of really interesting people on to get their expertise about various things.
Yeah. I mean, theology and philosophy are friends. They should go together, and any conversation about spirituality, I think, is going to be helped by a philosophical angle to it, or philosophical mindfulness. And we also love talking to experts in certain fields, and particularly in the church. The church is in need of listening to expertise. The church is in great need of awakening to some things, and we occupy that space in a post-evangelical kind of landscape where we speak to theists, we speak to Christians, we speak to post-evangelicals, we speak to atheists even sometimes. And always, though, we're trying to... my motivation is just a couple things. One is to have some conversations that I've been itching and dying to have, but I can't have from the pulpit. I can't go into in a 35-minute sermon. But I want to flesh some stuff out and get deeper and talk about the real stuff. And then also, I just love the opportunity to talk to people who are really smart, a lot smarter than me in their fields, and get to hear Kyle argue with them a little bit sometimes. Or, but
there's no off switch. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I enjoy having meaningful conversations about things that matter to me, which usually revolve around spirituality, around philosophy about existence and reality, and how do we filter that. So we have a good time talking.
Yeah, we do. Check it out if your listeners are interested.
So that's our conversation with Kyle and Randy. If you want to check out their work, the link to their podcast is in the show notes. I also referenced a debate that I had a while back about the scientific evidence concerning Enneagram. That's also in the show notes. If you're interested in connecting with us, we meet once a month on Zoom to discuss Enneagram and topics that we're really interested in. If you want to join us, there is a link at aroundthecircle.org. Just hit events, and of course all the links to all of our stuff are at that website. The music here is by the great Brian Claxton, and if you love this podcast, we want your help. You can support us on Patreon, or even easier is simply giving us some stars on your podcast platform of choice. Reviews are incredibly helpful if you have 10 minutes to just pitch some good vibe. We're going to end actually with a bonus section, and here to lead us out is my discussion with Kyle about being a 5 and some of the first steps that someone who's a 5 who's just getting into this material might take. And so we talk about being a 5 and having a very strong forewing and what that looks like. All right, friends, I'm gonna talk shop with Kyle about his type.
Yeah. So what was your specific 5 questions?
So when solving problems, you focus on what's right or on what the evidence and data says?
Right, all the same. I don't think they're different, and that's an honest answer.
Okay.
I'm an evidentialist, so what is right is the end of following the evidence.
Do you see a distinction between wisdom and knowledge?
Yes.
Do you have a preference
Between the two?
Yes.
How should I approach answering these questions? Is this intended to be an introspective exercise, or should I just say what I think?
It kind of is. Like on one front, it's introspective. On another front, it might be valuable for me to shotgun the questions in a way that might feel like I'm giving you, a psychological test, or like showing you pictures that you're responding to.
I don't care, honestly. I'm happy with either. Let me answer that question. I think I would prefer wisdom if I was pinned to it, but there'd be a whole discursus of why, what the two are and why they'd be different, and why I would prefer one over the other.
Perfect. Do you find that you are more nihilistic than other people?
Not at all. The opposite of that.
Do you find that you want to conserve energy?
Yes.
Do you find that you have a radar for future threats?
Can you give me an example of a threat?
You know when your bank account's going to run out.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're married. Are you married?
Yeah.
Are you more inclined to protect your resources as opposed to how your spouse spends money or engages the world?
More than her, yes. But just considering me, I still think I'm kind of in the middle. I'll definitely have, like, I spend way too much on whiskey.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm very hyper aware of like where I am financially and where I want to be. And yeah.
When you spend a lot on whiskey, is it normally when you are feeling pretty comfortable?
No. It's when I see a whiskey that I want.
Is it the case that you find yourself spending money on whiskey when you're in stress?
No, not that either. It really is situational. So maybe I should say I have deep sympathies with the tradition of virtue ethics, but also deep suspicions about it, to the extent that, studied with a famous virtue ethicist and wrote a paper basically saying it's wrong, and she was like, that's a pretty good paper, but you're wrong. But like, there are situational variables to human character that I think are robust and important, and this is actually one of the things I think the Enneagram evaluations are not sensitive to. It's one of the things I mentioned in that essay.
Talk more about that.
I can only speak to the one I took because I didn't pay money to take more than one because that seemed superfluous. So the questions, as I understood them while I was trying to answer them honestly, could not possibly have been sensitive to social context and the kinds of variables that we know heavily impact human behavior. So my answer literally would have been opposite depending on the context that I was in for many of the questions, and I just simply didn't know how to answer it. And when you pose me a question like that, I just go to the middle because I don't know how to answer it, and that's going to skew the result because in some circumstances I'm going to be heavily in one number and heavily in the opposite number in other circumstances, and the test just wasn't sensitive to that. Maybe others are, though. I don't know.
Is it the case that your non-committalness comes out of a space where you don't want to be put in a place where you haven't mastered your topic? Or
why do you think I'm non-committal?
I thought you said you were non-committal.
Did I say that?
About the assessment.
Oh, about that, right. About whether or not my previous answer, or about the ambivalence of my previous answer. Yeah, I prefer ambivalent to non-committal. I would happily commit if I knew the answer. It's just that in some circumstances I'm one thing and in others I'm the other thing.
Okay. Do you find that you read other people's emotions? Like, are you able to observe other people's emotions?
I don't know. I'm good at observing, what would you call that? Social cues. I can tell when someone's having a good time and when they're not, when they're confused and when they're following. I can tell when they got the joke and when they didn't.
Yeah.
I always get the joke. But whether, that's like no joke, that's one of the things I realized about myself earliest when I was, 6, was that I got the jokes and other people didn't. And it was something I wondered about. But I don't think that's emotion. So I don't know.
Would you describe yourself as conflict avoidant?
No.
Okay, perfect.
Although that's complicated. I don't enjoy conflict, but I also don't resist it. In fact, I'm more likely to create it. If I think it's useful, right? If it's constructive conflict, or if I think it's constructive conflict, I'll go right to it. But I don't like it. It's not an enjoyable experience either. So.
Yep. Do you expect rejection in your relationships?
No.
When you first
probably more the opposite of that.
Yeah. You're more inclined to want to connect to people around you?
Yeah, and to be, I expect it to be reciprocated.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, let me think about this for 2 seconds. Is it the case that you can hand out your energy generously?
No. So one of the personality traits I firmly believe in is introversion, and I'm very much that, but not to the extent that it's not extreme. Like I make friends easily, I hang out in social situations easily, have good time, but I reach a limit. So,
right.
Yeah.
Do you want to be seen by others?
Yeah. I have a podcast, man.
Do you avoid being ordinary?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to avoid being ordinary. I probably actually am pretty ordinary in some ways.
Do you feel good if you're true to yourself?
Do I feel good? What do you mean by feel good?
Authenticity isn't just a value, it's primary.
It is a primary value.
Yeah.
But it's one among other values.
I'm gonna give you two options. And I realize these are, again, we're painting with broad brushes. It's the nature of language, unfortunately, on this front. I see myself as original, sensitive, and cultured. I see myself as wise, smart, and receptive.
I have to pick one?
Yeah.
Probably the first one. Again, kind of ambivalent about it, but probably the first one.
Would you say that you are highly emotionally aware of what's going on within you?
I don't know. I've read enough Freud to believe in the subconscious. I'm sure I have one. We've never spoken.
Right? Perfect.
So probably not, but I also don't have any evidence of that directly.
When you transitioned out of your job, was your mind more on financial concerns, or did you experience something that we might describe as envy for what other people had?
But definitely both.
Okay.
Primarily absorbed by the first one because I have a family.
Yeah.
But if I was still single, it would probably be more the second one. That's probably my disposition.
Did I say greed first or envy first? I forgot.
Envy was the second one. You didn't describe the first one as greed, though, which I do not appreciate.
Perfect. Tell me why you don't appreciate it.
That's not greed to care about taking care of your family.
That's well said.
And the envy is mostly professional, rather than financial.
Are you able to really, when you take in the world, are you focused more on the past or are you focused more on the future?
That's interesting. I think definitely the past. I'd be lying if it wasn't the past. I'm also like, this is a place where my beliefs and orientations and my actions are in conflict, and I'm well aware of the conflict. So I'm a futurist in some senses. Philosophically, have very little commitment to the past. Made me unusual in a history department, but that is what I think about far more.
Talk about being a futurist.
I think maybe progressivist is a better word for it. I don't know. I'm very optimistic about the future, maybe even beyond the evidence, which is a little bit at conflict with my evidentialism. But like, I have a pretty hopeful take of where humanity's headed. I've always loved Star Trek for that reason. Like, that jives with me. I think that's both probably true and also where we should err, even if it's not true. There's not a conservative bone in my body. I don't have any attachment to past figures, past ideas. I have, I hear people, time. But this is an important distinction. I talk about them if I think their ideas or their arguments are relevant to the future of humanity. So I've heard very, progressive people like Jamie Smith, for example, say things like, do I really think I'm smarter than Augustine about X? And I have no trouble saying, yeah. Yes. Maybe not me personally.
Sure.
But people alive right now, yes. And I've met some of them. I don't think anybody in the past was special by, being when they were or where they were. So I always am kind of focused on where things are going. I wish that I had been born 400 or 500 years from now. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
It absolutely does. The idea that you are optimistic is interesting to me. When you have disagreements with your spouse, do you find that you are solving problems with optimism or with thoughtful reasoning? Or a different way?
I don't know. I don't think optimism is a problem-solving tool.
Okay. We could go over here is not the way that you solve problems.
What do you mean by that?
Some people solve problems by saying, baby, there's a problem over here, but we could go on an adventure. We could leave this whole thing behind and go over there.
No, I don't really do that.
Okay.
I don't think.
I was floating something that was a wrong rabbit trail.
No, that's interesting. I've never thought of it that way.
In solving problems, is it the case that you really want your spouse not only to see you, but to feel the same way you do about the world?
Well, insofar as I think I'm right, yes.
Talk about being right.
I don't know. What does one say about being right? I assume you mean in the context of like an interpersonal conflict or something, because that's a different kind of right.
Did I say being right, or did you say being right?
You said talk about being. Who said it first? I did.
Let me restate it then as a real dichotomy that would be helpful. I want you to see who I am and how I'm feeling is one way of addressing problems. Another way is you need to think through this cleanly and clearly given the evidence. That's another way of solving problems. Do you have a preference?
Oh, strongly second. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I took to be the reason I'm an obvious 5.
Right.
But maybe I missed the core of that.
What I'm hearing in your language is actually a lot of 4 language. Now, because 5s and 4s kind of sit together, so I'm this way with 1s and 9s. I use tools at 9 to balance. This is what wings really means, is you're flying and you try and balance. And sometimes we really balance with one wing versus the other. And so thinking about your emotions is a way that 5s are in the world.
Have you discerned anything? Do you?
So most of this is about finding type. Once you find your type, then you use the Enneagram as a tool, and it like exposes places that we might work on given our type, given our way of coming to the world. Where are the places that I'm likely going to struggle, and where are the places I'm going to succeed? And, elevating those in our minds can be valuable. So a few ideas for 5s jumping into the Enneagram. The first thing that comes to my mind is it can be valuable to see one's 5ness through the relationships that you have. So 5s often find safe positions to observe everything else, but when 5s are in relationships, those connections will expose the 5's tendency to withdraw, and this is worth naming. In excess, 5s can become secretive, they can withhold, they can hide from others, they can postpone their emotional needs, they can neglect their own physical health. A lot of that won't get exposed unless we're in relationships, but when we are, then those sorts of things kind of will often get elevated in the heart and mind of a 5. And so unhealth looks different for different types, but these are some of the unhealthy tendencies for 5s. A second thing is it's important to note that the needs of 5s are not a problem for the people who love you. This is a huge thing that 5s need to hear from the people who care about them, is that your needs aren't a problem. And being receptive to others' care can really matter. That's a choice. This is true of our spouse, of our friends, of our parents, but it's a primary for 5s connecting with God. Allowing and inviting God to provide can be a primary place of connection with God for 5s. Lastly, it seems to me health for 5s often means engaging one's body. Acting on what you know is a common struggle for 5s. 5s are very quick thinkers about their lives and the world out there, but actually doing something about it is the place of real work. So routine, productive action, this is a sign that a 5 is healthy. And so those would be, like, if you get into Enneagram, those are the sorts of things that you would focus on. It's, I've found my type, but what now? And because there are these patterns, really we look at other people's lives who share our type, and we can say, well, where do they commonly struggle? Where do they commonly succeed? The thing that 5s often give to the rest of us is, a perspective that's untainted by emotion, that gives clear insight into the world out there. They elevate the facts for us. that tend to, that matter. The wisdom that the non-attachment fives bring is a treasure. And these are some places, if I was a five, that I might jump in and start asking these sorts of questions and elevating that kind of focus.